ఇంటర్మీడియట్ విద్యారంగంలో అగ్రగామి మన NSR ఇంపల్స్ ఎడ్యుకేషన్ ఇన్స్టిట్యూషన్. ఐఐటి జేఈఈ అయినా నీట్ అయినా తిరుగులేని విద్యా సంస్థ NSR ఇంపల్స్.
Now let us continue with what is called absorption of water. How absorption of water will occur? Absorption of water occurs by two processes. What are they here? That is, first one is called apoplast pathway, apoplast movement or apoplast pathway we call. This is the first pathway, and coming to second one is referred as symplast or symplast movement, or itself is called symplast pathway or symplast transport. So this apoplast here, the basic differences if you look at here, the apoplast is nothing but passive transport. Passive transport means we all know very well, right? It occurs where to where? Here it occurs from along with the concentration gradient. So let us write along with the concentration gradient. Along with the concentration gradient means from where to where? High concentration to low concentration. High concentration to low concentration. Now without energy, or we say without ATP, without energy, or we say without ATP. So no energy, no ATP, happens from high concentration to low concentration. That itself is called passive transport. Now it is also referred as intercellular transport. Intercellular transport across cell walls. Intercellular transport across cell walls. Similarly, let us write twice reverse versa to the symplast. So obviously what you have to write here? Apoplast, when you say it is a passive transport. So obviously what do we write? Symplast, we write it as what? Active transport. Symplast is active transport. How it occurs? So here if you look at, this is against concentration gradient. This is against concentration gradient. This is along with the concentration gradient, that is passive. Remember, that is apoplast. When you take the symplast, what do we write? This is active transport. Along against concentration gradient means where to where this happens? Low concentration to high concentration. When it has to move from low to high, now this happens, it requires ATP or energy. It requires ATP or energy. Now when you say this is intercellular transport, this is intercellular transport. So here we can write this as intracellular transport. Okay. So what do we call this? Intracellular transport. Now this happens within the cell. Within the cell to other cell, to other cell. What is the meaning of intercellular here? In between cells. In between cells. Right. How does it occurs? Occurs across the cell walls. Now this is also important. It occurs across the cell walls, whereas it occurs It occurs by cytoplasmic streaming. It occurs by cytoplasmic streaming or with the help of plasmodesmata, or it occurs with the help of plasmodesmata. Okay. So, it occurs by cytoplasmic streaming or by plasmodesmata. Now, let us discuss in detail about what is passive transport and what is active transport. That we know very clearly. We made the writing of differences here. Now, what you need to understand here is nothing but apoplast movement. What exactly meaning of this? Let us say that where the symplastic movement will take place. That is the major differences what we need to study here. Now if you take the apoplast, now let us discuss apoplast. These are the major differences. What are the major differences? One, we are considering it as a passive transport, other we are considering it as a active transport. Rest all parameters which you know very well. And where else the major difference here? Apart from energy, no energy, but here it needs energy. And here intercellular, that is in between cells, here it is intra, means within the cell. It occurs across the cell walls, it occurs by cytoplasmic streaming and plasmodesmata. Now, if you look at the cytoplasmic streaming here, cytoplasmic streaming we were discussed or disclosed and discovered in case of hydrilla plant, and we will come back to this point. Let us come back to apoplast movement. So, what we have to discuss here? Apoplast movement. Now, apoplast movement if you take, now let us take for example root system. From the root system, the translocation of water occurs. Translocation of water and minerals to shoot system. Mostly occurs by apoplast. Mostly occurs by apoplast. What's the meaning of this? Now, if you take, this is a total plant. If you take, this is a total plant. So, you find this is nothing but the root system. This you find this is called root and this is nothing but shoot. Okay. So, if you take the root to shoot, the movement is happening. What's happening? From root to shoot, what's movement is happening? Water and minerals. So, here water is there plus minerals are getting transported. Now, how does it occurs? Mostly occurs by apoplast. Apoplast means what did we discuss? It occurs by across cell walls. Apoplast means how does it occurs? It occurs by across cell walls. Mostly what happens here? Mostly what happens here? It's nothing but apoplast. Why? Look at here. Now, if you take this is a plant cell. Surrounded by what you find? This is nothing but cell wall. Now, you find another cell. So, here if you take one cell to other cell, there is some intercellular space is there. Okay. Now, this is cell wall. For example, let us listen carefully. From the root water is coming. When the root water is coming, now it moves across the cell. Across the cell wall, comes out. What do you call this space? Intercellular space. What do you call the space? Intercellular space. between two cells, the space what you find, it's called intercellular space. Okay, the space what you call intercellular space. Across the cell wall, it comes out intercellular space, again enters into cell wall, again enters into cell wall, again comes into the intercellular space, again goes across the cell wall. Now, in this picture what I have drawn, can you see water and minerals are entering inside the cell? No. To the boundary walls, across the cell wall going, across the cell wall going, across the cell wall going, in between touching intercellular spaces. Not entering into the cell. Not entering into the cell. Why? Because upper leaf need of water. If it waits until the cell fills water, it waits until the next cell fill water, by the time it reaches to upper leaf will die. So, cell to cell movement is nothing but simplest, that needs energy. So, instead of that what it will do? It will not enter inside the cell, it will not enter inside the cell, it moves across the cell walls. It moves across the cell walls. For example, now if you look at here also Aldra, just have a look on this. Now if you take, this is a cell, this is a cell, imagine, this is a cell, this is a cell. So it moves across the, enters into intercellular space, goes to the next cell and goes to the next cell, goes to the next cell, goes to the next cell, goes faster rate it moves and reaches to tip of the leaf. That's why mostly it occurs by the process called as passive transport, where it is mostly it is by, what is the method you have to remember? Mostly it is passive transport. Passive transport means no energy. Without entering into the cell, across the cell walls or across intercellular spaces, the movement occurs at a faster rate, so that the tip of the leaf will get water in a fast rate, in a very faster rate. That's why mostly what occurs is nothing but apoplast, because it does not need energy. It is a passive transport and it occurs across the cell walls, across intercellular spaces. Now, let us see that, for example, if you take the root system, let us see what happens within the root system. But before we talk about the root system, we will come back to root system. Before that, let us understand what is called as simplest movement. Let us understand what is called simplest movement. Now, the simplest movement here, simplest movement, how does it will occur? Let us see now. It is of again two types. It is of two types. What are the two types here? We can write, first one is vacuolar simplest, second one is non-vacuolar simplest. Okay, so simplest what you find here, it's further divided into two types. What are the two types of simplest? Here we find a vacuolar simplest and the second one is non-vacuolar simplest. Now let us differentiate. Now what is happening in this case? It occurs through, simplest occurs through intracellular spaces. Intracellular spaces by cytoplasmic streaming. Cytoplasmic streaming first observed in hydrilla plant or also occurs by plasma desmata. Now let us see. What is this intracellular here? One cell is here. Now intra means, what we have to understand here, intra means within the cell. Now it passes across the cell membrane this is cell wall. Now what do you find here? Cell membrane. Okay, what you find here? This is nothing but cell membrane. Now it passes across the cell membrane, enters inside the cell. Now cell is fully filled. Now sometimes what happens? Cytoplasm shows rotation. What do you find here? Cytoplasm. Okay, let me draw better here. I don't think whether it is visible or not. I will just check it out whether it is visible or not, so that I can continue. 1 second. Yeah, sorry guys, let us continue. It is clearly visible, right? So what you can see here, it enters across the cell membrane, enters into what? Cytoplasm. Now cell is fully filled with fluid. Now what cytoplasm will do? In some plants it shows clockwise rotation like this. In some plants it shows anti-clockwise rotation. That means cytoplasm keeps moving one place to other place. In some plant cells it shows zigzag manner. It shows the movement in zigzag manner. Now excess amount of the fluid after filling the cell, it throws out. That is what is called as cytoplasmic streaming. That is what is called as cytoplasmic streaming. What is cytoplasmic streaming here? Cytoplasm shows movement. Cytoplasm shows rotations. Cytoplasm shows rotations. Cytoplasmic streaming. Cytoplasm shows rotations. With the movement of the cytoplasm, cytoplasm pushes the component out of the plant cell. So streaming means movement. It keeps streaming, moving from one place to other place. Cytoplasm pushes the component from inside the cell into outside the cell. This is first observed in case of hydrilla plant. What did they observe? They thought that initially they observed the movement of the chloroplast. Initially what they observed? Movement of chloroplast in hydrilla plant. That means they thought that okay, chloroplast is moved. Earlier when they saw chloroplast is here, after some time when they saw chloroplast got translocated here. Chloroplast got translocated here. Okay, earlier chloroplast is here, later chloroplast got translocated here. Means chloroplast is showing movement they thought initially. Initially they thought there is a movement of chloroplast. So they thought, oh, chloroplast has ability to move from one place to other place. But later they understood that it's not the having ability of the chloroplast to move. It's the ability of the cytoplasm which shows rotation in clockwise or anti-clockwise or zigzag movement of cytoplasm causing the movement of chloroplast. So they came to know cytoplasmic streaming. First time observed in hydrilla plant. They observed initially the movement of chloroplast. Later they found that cytoplasmic streaming was responsible for movement of chloroplast within the hydrilla plant. That means cytoplasm while rotating, it takes excess quantity of the minerals and fluids. After filling the cell, it throws into the next cell. So here it comes into next cell. So that may be by cytoplasmic streaming or by, either it may happen due to cytoplasmic streaming or by plasma desmata Now what is this plasma desmata here? Plasma desmata means cytoplasmic extensions. Cytoplasmic extensions, or we say cytoplasmic bridges connecting two cells, connecting two neighbor cells, What we are discussing here, cytoplasmic extensions are there. They act like a bridges. What do? They connect the two neighbor cells. So if you look at this particular scenario, I will just erase this. So, this is one cell, this is another cell. Okay. So, here what you find here, this is nothing but one cell, and here you find another cell. What we have to understand, cytoplasmic extensions or bridges, we studied in cytology. So, still I am telling you here, carefully you try to understand. Cytoplasm extends, comes out, cytoplasm comes out, here also cytoplasm comes out and form the bridges. This is what is called plasmadesmata. Itself is called as what? Plasmadesmata. Cytoplasmic extensions of one cell connects with cytoplasmic extensions of the next neighbor cell. Both are interconnected by a bridge by extension of cytoplasm. It is called plasmadesmata. So, what is plasmadesmata? Plasmadesmata meaning is what? Cytoplasmic extensions or bridges connecting two neighbor cells. The two neighbor cells are connected by plasmadesmata. Now, what happens when cell is fully filled here? Now, excess amount of the fluid enters into next empty cell by plasmadesmata, and this occurs with the help of energy or ATP. This is happening within the cell, or we say cell to cell movement. Cell to cell movement, this itself is called symplast. This itself is called as what? Symplast. Now, what is happening here? One cell is fully filled and comes to the next neighbor cells with the help of ATP or energy, right, and that occurs by plasmadesmata. Cell to cell movement or within the cell to other cell to cell movement, or we say intracellular movement, meaning same, that is within the cell to going to other cell. This process requires ATP. It may occur by cytoplasmic streaming or may occur by plasmadesmata. Movement is happening across the cell membrane, it is crossing. This is cell membrane, it is crossing the cell membrane, enters inside the cell, going to other cell through plasmadesmata. Such type of movement from cell to cell, intracellular, cell to cell movement by cytoplasmic streaming or by plasmadesmata, it is called as what? Symplast. What do we call this? Symplast. We call this as symplast. Now, if you look at symplast movement pathway, it may be vacuolar, or we studied it may be non-vacuolar. So, I hope you all understood this symplast movement. What is symplast? Again I repeat, listen carefully. Occurs through intracellular spaces, that is by cytoplasmic streaming. Cytoplasmic streaming was observed in hydrilla plant. So, in this people could able to study movement of chloroplast, right, and here in hydrilla plant initially they thought chloroplast is moving, but later they understood it is because of cytoplasmic movement, chloroplast is moving from one place to other place. Either symplast occurs by cytoplasmic streaming or by plasmadesmata. What is meant by plasmadesmata in this case? A cytoplasmic extensions, or we call bridges connecting the two neighboring cells. When you take these two are neighbor cells, what is happening here? The movement is happening across the cell membrane, crossing the cell membrane, entering in the cell. Intra we call, or within the cell, cell to cell movement by the extensions called plasmadesmata. This takes energy, ATP, movement is happening from one cell to other cell, and this is a process called as what? Symplast. So, what else we have to study here? In the beginning we said symplast, it is of two types. How many types? Two types. What are they? Vacuolar symplast and non-vacuolar symplast. What is a vacuolar symplast and what is a non-vacuolar symplast? Nothing, very simple, try to understand here. Suppose if you take vacuolar symplast, now in this case, the first one I am writing a vacuolar symplast. Now in this case, one cell to other cell. This is a plant cell. In this 90% of the volume is being occupied by vacuole. Vacuole contains a layer called tonoplast. Vacuole contains what is called tonoplast. Guys, quickly recollect what you studied about vacuole in cytology. Okay, so here what's happening? The fluid is entering across the membrane, across the cell membrane, then enters into cytoplasm. So, from cell membrane enters into cytoplast or cytoplasm you can write. From there enters into vacuole. So, it enters into vacuole across tonoplast. Then again what happens here? From the tonoplast it again comes back to cytoplasm. Right. Again crosses cell membrane and enters into a next neighbor cell. Enters into a next neighbor cell. So, when it is entering into next neighbor cell, so it entered into next neighbor cells, again it enters into same across the cell membrane, enters into vacuole. So, vacuole to vacuole movement. What's happening here? Vacuole to vacuole movement. That's why it's called as vacuolar symplast. What are we discussing here? If within the cell it enters into vacuole. From there again enters into next neighbor cell. In next neighbor cell where? Vacuole. So what's happening here? Vacuole to vacuole movement is happening. That's why it's called as vacuolar symplast. Now in cytology, if you remember. Now if you can remember in cytology, what did you discuss in cytology? In cytology you have studied the concentration of cytoplasm. It's more. The concentration of cytoplasm, it's compared to vacuole less. That means cytoplasm contains low concentration. What do you find here? Cytoplasm contains low concentration, and what else you studied? Vacuole is highly concentrated. Vacuole is highly concentrated. Okay, are you getting me? What you studied in cytology? Vacuole is highly concentrated. Now, cytoplasm contains low concentration. Where to where the movement is happening? From low to high. Here what occurs is called active transport. Here what occurs in this case is called active transport. That's why symplast is a active transport. I am connecting here the point with the first year cytology. Look at your textbook, open the textbook and recollect what exactly you studied for vacuole. What did you study? Within the plant cell, vacuole is highly concentrated, meaning vacuole contains high concentration. Vacuole contains high concentration, that means like this. Here vacuole contains high concentration, this is vacuole. And then cytoplasm contain low concentration. Okay, vacuole contain high concentration, cytoplasm contain low concentration. Where to where the movement is happening? Low concentration to high concentration. So what's happening here? It's called symplast. Where to where the movement is happening? Cytoplasm to vacuole, low to high, it needs energy, ATP. That's why symplast is called as active transport. I hope now it is clear. Sometimes the movement happens from vacuole of one plant cell to the vacuole of other plant cell. The movement is like this, crosses the cell membrane, enters into cytoplasm, from there vacuole, again enters into cytoplasm and comes out of the cell membrane, goes to next neighbor cell. Vacuole to vacuole movement is called as vacuolar symplast. What do you have to study? Vacuole to vacuole movement is called vacuolar symplast. Now what's happening here? Within the vacuole high concentration, cytoplasm having low concentration, movement is from low to high with the help of ATP or energy. This is called symplast or active transport. Now what we have to discuss? The second one. What is the second one? Non-vacuolar symplast. vacuolar symplast, non-vacuolar symplast, non-vacuolar symplast. That means here this is one plant cell, this is another plant cell, here is a vacuole, here is a vacuole, let us take. Now here it enters into the cytoplasm without entering into vacuole, goes out of the cell, enters into cytoplasm, from there goes out without entering into vacuoles. The component fluid here not entering into vacuole, here it is moving from cytoplasm of one cell to the cytoplasm of another cell without entering into vacuole. It is called non-vacuolar symplast. That means it crosses the cell membrane, across the cell membrane, then into cytoplasm, and then goes out, enters into next neighbor cell, and in the neighbor cell again enters into cytoplasm. So this is called as non-vacuolar symplast. Again I repeat, what is non-vacuolar symplast? So here it crosses the cell membrane, enters into cytoplasm, and without, it will not enter into vacuole, vacuole is not involved. So from vacuole cytoplasm goes out here, again enters into next neighbor cell cytoplasm, then goes out. That is why as vacuoles are not involved in transportation of minerals and water in between the two cells, within the cell to other cell, this is called non-vacuolar symplast. It crosses the cell membrane, enters into cytoplasm. So this is cell membrane, this is cytoplasm, again enters into cytoplasm, goes out. So it is called non-vacuolar symplast. Now I hope you got the full clarity of the symplast. This is vacuolar symplast, vacuole to vacuole movement from one cell to other cell, vacuolar symplast. Especially it needs energy, ATP. So it itself is referred as active transport. Non-vacuole means without entering into vacuoles, cytoplasm of one cell to cytoplasm of other cell, it is called non-vacuolar symplast. Okay. So we have two types, vacuolar symplast and non-vacuolar symplast. So these two cases both will come under what? Symplast. Now what we want to discuss, let us see, now let us take the example of root system. Now when we take the example of root system, let us see where apoplast will occur and where symplast will occur. Right. Now we see where apoplast occurs, where symplast occurs by taking the study of example of root system. Let us continue. What is the example we are discussing now? Root system. When you take the root system here, now in the root system when you take the transverse section, what do we find in the anatomy of the root system? We find, so here it contains the first cell, this is called epidermis. Then passing the epidermis, for example if you take this is a root system, now there is an absorption of water generally in the plant. So here you find the plant shoot system having all the branches and all that. So here absorption of water and minerals occurs by roots. Absorption of water and minerals taken care by roots. Once the water enters, what is the first layer it crosses? So here we find root hair. What do we find? A root hair. Water first enters into root hair. Let us take water first enters into root hair. Then from root hair enters into what? epidermis. From there the water enters into first layer called epidermis, and from there enters into another layer. What is the next layer? Cortex. Let us take more width to see the anatomy part. This is cortex. Then we find a layer. What is that layer? We write that layer as endodermis. So what we are discussing here is nothing but root. Here we are discussing nothing but what? Root. Now root endodermis, you remember we find Casparian strips. In the root endodermis, what we find? A thick Casparian strips. Okay, a thick Casparian strips. So when you take the endodermis, here you find a thick Casparian strips. Enters inside, what you find? Pericycle. What you find? Pericycle. Crossing the pericycle, what you find? A vascular bundle having xylem and phloem. So this is vascular bundle. This we know. We studied in anatomy, right? Whenever roots, there is an absorption of water and minerals by the root. How absorption occurs? First water is absorbed by root hairs. From the root hairs enters into first layer called epidermis. From there into cortex. From the cortex to endodermis. Endodermis to a vascular bundle. The vascular bundle contains xylem and phloem. Okay, it contains what? Xylem and phloem. So here if you take this entry, let me tell you, from the root hair to epidermis, cortex, here what occurs is apoplast. What occurs is apoplast. But endodermis is a place where what occurs is symplast. Why? Because of Casparian strips. Okay, let us study now the same thing here. Now you are taking the cross section of this. When you take the cross section, first layer of cell contains what is called epidermis. Same thing I am drawing here. Now you can understand, right? After epidermis, what you can find? You can find another cell. What is that cell? Cell contains what is called cortex. After cortex, what do you find? You find a layer or cell, nothing but endodermis. Now these contain suberized cells. We will discuss that part also. Now after endodermis, it directly enters into pericycle, then into xylem and then into phloem. This is root. What we are discussing, this is nothing but root. We are discussing root. After entering inside the root, after entering into xylem and phloem, what happens? After entering into xylem and phloem, what happens? It goes in upward direction. Means it goes to the shoot. It goes to the shoot. From xylem and phloem, food and water goes to shoot. That means up to here is a root part. From here it goes to shoot. From here it goes to shoot part. Now the same phenomena what we have discussed here, we will understand once again here. Now let us concentrate on this, right. So what you have to understand? Now here you find what is called as root hair. What we are discussing? Root system. What we are discussing? Root system. From the root hair, what absorption occurs? Water is moving. We are talking about movement of water. So when you talk the movement of water, of course along with the water it carries minerals. What we are discussing? Movement of water. Now from the root hair, it enters into the cell called as what? Cell epidermis. So here when it enters into epidermis, it will not enter into epidermis, it move across the cell walls. So this is nothing but cell wall and this is nothing but cell membrane. Now where to where the movement is happening? It's moving across the cell walls. It's moving across cell walls. So when it is movement is happening across the cell walls and not crossing cell membrane. Can it is crossing the cell membrane here? No, it's not crossing the cell membrane. As it is not crossing the cell membrane, the movement is happening across the cells.